You get where I'm going?
Yes, I hear where you're going. And, I think we see body cameras as a tool, but not necessarily as the panacea for, police community relations. I spoke a lot about trust, and we supported a bill with the California Police Chiefs Association, for instance, that would have expanded the use of procedural justice training, really looking at implicit bias. And I think these reforms are necessary as part of overall approach to improve community police relations. I don't think body cameras by themselves will create the trust that's needed for the public to be okay with then using. I think body cameras could be a great tool for training, but the trust has to be there. And so I think that there's other things that are just as important, perhaps even more important. We talked about on our report about the importance of data collection, community oversight. These are reforms that are just as important that need to take place, or perhaps be preceded with, and I think that ultimately communities should decide how body cameras are being used.
But it's interesting being here because and just kind of my opinion of this is, where a lot of these problems are going on, these are underserved communities. Every one of these communities are underserved, no doubt about it. And law enforcement seen as an occupying force, they've been that way for decades. Nothing has ever changed. And we're all flying here at the 500-foot level instead of the 30,000-foot level. We know they have underperforming schools. We know they don't have banks, supermarkets, no arts for our kids, no sports activities for our kids. And that's really the underlying issue. If we fix a lot of those issues, law enforcement is not going to be there for the calls for service because of the crimes. And until that changes, you can put body cameras in and we can do all these great things, but nothing has ever changed. Until that changes, in my mind, it's not going to happen. And I'm 7 months removed from being out there 30 years. And that's really the bottom line until that changes. And we have not had that discussion how to change that. I would love to take a community here in Sacramento that's got a lot of problems and go in there and fix some of those problems. And I think life would be dramatically different. But like I said, we can sit here and talk about it to death, and until that really changes, it's not going to happen. And what does it require? A lot of money to go in and fix these communities that have been broken, like I say, for decades, 30, 40, 50 years. So that's really the key question we need to ask ourselves and look inside ourselves, and when will that change? Otherwise, this is all window dressing. Not all of it, but a good part of it is, because it's body cameras today, and tomorrow it's going to be something else. And that's the sad part about it. Yeah. Is let's get them out there and really fix those things. It's socio-economic issues to deal with. Right. Law enforcement is a part of it, but that's really what it comes down to.
And in response to that comment, I think I heard earlier LAPD estimated it costs $7 million per year to, I believe, purchase and maintain body cameras. So just to respond to that comment, I mean that those are. They are expensive to maintain and to purchase, so one has to question, is that the best use of resources when we're looking at how do you improve safety in communities, and should the focus be more education or other public goods? So I think body cameras can be a valuable resource, but it's something that communities should be deciding if this is the best use of their resources.
Right, I agree. I just want to thank you guys for coming up here and sharing your thoughts. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite and welcome our third panel of experts on the topic of body-worn cameras, community and law enforcement goals and objectives. From the City of Vacaville Police Department, we have Police Chief John Carley, and from the California Highway Patrol, we have Captain Rich Desmond. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to this select committee, and it's a pleasure to be here and representing not only Cal Chiefs but also the City of Vacaville. I'd like to begin with just a little bit of a perspective of what we're talking about today. 26 years ago, I started my law enforcement career in Northern California, and one of the first things that was issued to me was a recorder. While it might not have been a digital recorder, it was still a recorder nonetheless. And for 26 years, my agency, a lot like many agencies in California and around this country, have spent time accurately training and enforcing and documenting the very essence of the criminal behavior that we were enforced and we were hired to do. That was only one piece of it. If you look back in the last 10 years, it's very common that agencies around the country and around the state have used some form of cameras, whether it's an in-car camera and then the progression of body-worn camera. What we heard so far today is a lot of examples from what the technologies are and the concerns of policy. The Rialto study is probably, in my estimation as a chief, one of the best studies out there because it deals with what we're talking about, and that is the community relation issue. It also has to do with, do you trust the very enforcers that are hired to protect the public? We as an agency and as a profession must always recognize that what we have to do is look at what is our purpose, and we are the community. And as long as we can begin moving forward understanding that we're not separate from the community but part of the community, that is a step moving forward in the right direction. Because it takes the partnership and not simply we are the enforcers with the badge and or a person behind it. From a policy standpoint, the city of Vacaville, and before I promoted to chief, I will go back to around 2008. What I saw around our agency was this camera. It's very popular because it is an off-the-shelf. It is not for a law enforcement device. At the time, it could be purchased for $99. And so the best use of our time and resources at the time was, do we create a policy because the officers wanted to carry it. Primarily, most of them were traffic officers because they felt that the testimony that they were given, there was a shift in what was occurring in the courts. Do we believe the police anymore? Do we believe the officer who makes a traffic stop? Do we believe an officer who goes in to conduct an investigation? And so this became a primary tool by the individual. So as an agency, one of the recommendations that was made was we need to study this, and that's where we brought in our own association. As an agency of a city of 100,000, it was very important to make sure that if we were going to allow officers to carry something such as a body-worn video before it was even used publicly, we needed to have a policy. We didn't want just video out there, and yet we knew it was occurring. So this was occurring all the way back in the era of 2006 and 2007 in the city of Vacaville. So with that, what we did is we partnered with the association and we crafted a policy that is a policy very similar to what we're using today. Interestingly enough, it looks very similar to the Rialto Police Department's policy. And that is we require officers to manage and maintain the equipment. We train them on how to use them. We make sure that it's very clear on how a body-worn camera is to be used in the public. And this was an emerging technology, but one thing we did know is we already had policies in place on when audio can be used, and we had since the day I started in my professional career. We all know that audio is more protected than video, but video is more sensational because it gives the person the view that you get to then decide what you're seeing versus just what you're hearing. It's a very useful tool in law enforcement, and I welcome it. The study that was done in Vacaville, very similar to Rialto, ended up into the Police Executive Research Forum's publication that was adopted under the COPS program. For Vacaville, it was an internal trust issue. And the reality is if we're going to look at the police as part of the community, what we want to see is both sides. And what we found was, when asked, 90% of the officers said they wanted to wear this because they knew it was a benefit. When told that it could actually protect them, if in fact a fair process would allow the organization to go through a professional standards inquiry, over 93% of the department said, we still want this. Law enforcement is not opposed to this. Law enforcement is in favor of this. But it has to be done under the right context. And in that context is believing that the trust in the police is valid today as it was in the past. And that's what's under scrutiny. Also, I'd like to just make a comment that what we've heard today, technology is expensive. And so where we started as an agency, these were off-the-shelf devices that a lot of vendors that sell product to law enforcement looked at this and saw agencies that were ahead of the curve and began to sell it as a law enforcement product, which it is not. What we're seeing with Taser and Wolfcom and several others is these are truly products that are designed with law enforcement in mind, with feedback from law enforcement. I know I personally have given feedback to all these agencies, including Taser and Wolfcom. So we embrace this. We believe that a policy must be in place, and IACP, for those who don't know, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, have endorsed what a model agency should look like. And I think we're at a point in 2015 where there's a lot of discussion about what it is and what it isn't. But it's very clear the protection of the rights of the individual are just as important as for when we're dealing with a criminal case. And we've heard in many forums we need to be careful about going into a sensitive case for domestic violence. I agree. What we also need to understand, though, is the recording of the video is for criminal investigative purposes, and it is not to just be eavesdropping. So while we do need to be sensitive as law enforcement agents of the community, we also need to understand that that's a factual account of the occurrence of the investigation and need not confuse the two in a belief that we don't trust the police. I'll be the first to tell you, and I won't be the last chief to say this, if there are officers among the ranks of law enforcement in my agency or across the country that behave in a criminal way, they deserve to be prosecuted. But for the vast majority of all the law-abiding officers that are there on behalf of the community, they need to be supported and trusted. And so with that, my perspective on the issue of complaints, I will tell you that while we didn't do the Rialto study in our department, we can attest that we had the same experience. When body-worn cameras were implemented to every officer in 2009, so we've been in 6 years, we're on our 3rd generation, the professionalism of the officer is escalated in the sense that there's a better awareness and discussion of what it means to be a police officer. So part of the training in and of itself creates an elevated professionalism. It also creates the environment where the public is more likely to recognize that they have a place to be accountable and professional as well. And then also with the issue of the how do you roll a program out like this, a smaller agency, there's 18,000 agencies in this country, but a city of 100,000 is not considered small. It would be medium. We're not L.A., we're not Oakland, and we're not Sacramento or San Francisco. But a city that has around 100 police officers, when I have to implement a program like this, it's at $250 per device. It's a simple math formula. The cost is in the storage. The cost is in the long-term back end. Because these products and devices that will be sold to law enforcement, you can pretty much account that they will not last any more than 2 to 3 years. They just wear out. They stop recording. The batteries die. I'll just use the comparison. How many cell phones have you bought in the last 3 years? And that will be your example for how many body-worn cameras are going to have to be sold to law enforcement. So with that, I'll defer to you for more comment.
Thank you very much, Chief. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Rich Desmond. I'm the legislative representative for the CHP. And listening to Chief Carley and others who have testified today, it's remarkable how much we agree on with respect to the benefits of body cameras, and not to put too fine a point on Chief Carley's comments and Sir, your comments and the findings in the DOJ report from 2014. I mean, we agree how body cameras can improve public trust, improve transparency. With us, a few issues I'd like to talk first about the citizen complaints and misconduct that you have in your agenda. We've had a in-car camera system since 2009 in the Highway Patrol. Right now we have about 2,000 cameras in our patrol cars. And it's really remarkable how we have seen our rates of citizens' complaints go down. You've heard other folks testify here today, and some with specific illustrations of how someone walks in, files a complaint, they find out it was all recorded, and they withdraw or rescind their complaint. But we think a lot of that decrease is also as a result of officers knowing that they're being watched. So we certainly understand that there's been a big benefit to our in-car camera system. One thing that we see a lot, though, in our department is that the camera doesn't tell the whole story. It's certainly not a panacea, and you've heard that thrown around, I think, several times. I've been an internal affairs investigator for the CHP in a couple different stints, and often you'll see an officer is looking one way, and the in-car camera is seeing something completely different, and you have to take all of that into account when you're doing an investigation. And I think with the body camera, it may be no different, because most agencies, I think, will use the body camera that's fastened to the front of the uniform. Well, an officer's head is going back and forth and seeing a lot of different things. So sometimes reconciling what the officer is seeing and what the camera views is difficult from an investigative perspective. Certainly a great tool, and it is certainly a positive step, but it's not going to solve all the problems. There are going to be issues with body cameras. As far as the policy that we are developing in the CHP, we've been looking at this issue for a long time, and I certainly thank Assemblymember Joan Sawyer for taking your personal interest in seeing that the CHP implements a body-worn camera pilot program. As you know, there was an augmentation in the budget recently signed by Governor Brown for the Department of Finance to authorize up to $1 million for a CHP pilot program. And there was also trailer bill language that lays out some specific policy areas that will need to be included in a plan that we must submit to the legislature by January 1st of this year. A lot of those policy provisions are things that we already include in our in-car camera policy. Some of the things you've heard here today, some are a little more controversial than other aspects, but some things do certainly concern us. I think there'll be a challenge, as they've been for other agencies that have already implemented a plan. One is the activation issue. We talk a lot about you having to press a button on exactly when to activate these cameras. As many of you know, a lot of these incidents arise. You don't know when you may need to activate one of these cameras. We had an officer recently assaulted and almost killed during what started out as a very benign encounter, and it quickly escalated to something else. Is that the kind of incident where an officer would have to activate a camera for something that is just a run-of-the-mill public contact that seemingly at the beginning has no law enforcement per se context to it? That's a big issue for us. For the CHP also, we have some unique characteristics as a decentralized statewide agency that really will impact how we implement a statewide body-worn camera program. We have 103 field offices throughout the state and another 25 or so offices that actually deploy uniformed personnel. Many of these offices are in urban areas where the infrastructure is already there, it's existing, but in many of our offices, they're in very far-flung areas of the state with very little infrastructure at the office level, but very little bandwidth that would support a body-worn camera system program, certainly one that requires cloud storage. For us, being decentralized in that way, we require probably a lot more personnel resources involved. Right now, at each level, at each one of these 103 field offices, we have an actual officer, an evidence officer, who has to handle evidentiary issues, booking, maintaining, releasing evidence. With a body-worn camera system, we would probably need at least one additional officer in most of these offices. So it's not just a matter of the cameras, which Chief Carley represented $250 per camera. I don't know how. I think the ones we're looking at are more than that. Of course, there's a big range because it depends, of course, on whether you adopt their storage solution, on what kind of price you pay for the cameras. But for us, upgrading all of our infrastructure statewide is certainly a big cost component for it. You ask about whether we're going to do something incrementally or statewide. Certainly, we're going to be starting with an incremental approach. We'll be submitting a plan for legislative review by the first of the year. And the initial plan, something we've been looking at for quite some time, is to start with 1 or 2 offices. And normally that's how we test any new technology. Test it out for a year and then prepare a report on some of the best practices, which will, of course, incorporate the items in SB 85. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Gallagher?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the policy that you developed in Vacaville. One of the proposals this year was to prohibit officers from being able to review the tape, prior to the investigation, or I can't remember the exact terminology there, but in your guys' case, do you allow the officers to review tape that's on the body-worn camera prior, and maybe tell me about what your experience was and how that's helpful or not helpful in terms of dealing with these situations?
Thank you for your question. The issue of being able to review footage from a body-worn camera is something that in the last 6.5 years of our policy, it's what have you learned and what have we learned? I have worked, my background is in technology, so I do understand this. As the professional of officer standards and training dealing with IAs, I oversaw the program and we implemented the body-worn camera. So it came up then. It also came up as an administrator, and it's come up since then as a chief. We in Vacaville believe, and I know it's the position of Cal Chiefs as well, that we should allow the officers to look at the video. If we believe that we trust the officers to do what we train them to do and what we've hired them to do, and they have to use force up into the use of deadly force, the requirement at any other stage of their professional career is that they conduct themselves professionally and that they're going to have to make an account for what occurred if there is a criminal prosecution. No different in the use of deadly force if that becomes necessary. Has it come up as an issue in some of our cases when we're dealing with an officer-involved shooting? Working with the union, working with the district attorney's office, everyone is present. There's no mystery that this is kind of a new emerging trend. And having worked through the process, we have all seen how successful it is from the investigators that are asking the questions of the officers. They're in a very difficult position. But what we found is that we're looking for the truth. We're looking for the whole context of what occurred, and we're not looking to catch anyone in a misunderstanding or how good of a memory they have. We understand that training that needs to occur at all levels is from the investigators to the administrators to the officers who are involved, is that what they perceived occurred at the time is in their best interest. As what was already spoken to, you can even look at a video that was shown to you within the last 2 hours. You're looking at one particular area and the officer is looking anywhere else. I could draw your attention to look at a person's hands, and yet the officer may not have been looking at the hands, but we get the ability to do so after the fact. So it's very important that the right questions are asked to get to the details, but the details nonetheless are there. So we believe, and it's in our policy, and that is our opinion as well, that that is the best use of the officer's ability to recall what occurred to give the full context and texture of the event.
Maybe just as a follow-up to that, and then there, as we talked about earlier, there's protections in place with these body-worn cameras that there's no ability to alter that tape. It's going to, whatever is shown on there, that's what it's going to be, correct?
That is correct. Many of the third-party vendors, including the ones you've heard today, that are there for law enforcement, speak to the issue of how do you make sure that information is not altered. I could tell you that over the many years that I have been involved in technology and teaching technology and investigative uses of technology, I don't know that anyone can think of a time where video has ever been altered in a criminal case by law enforcement. That said, that is the one extreme that we're trying to protect and prevent from occurring. So I would say on balance, the companies that are utilizing the technology, whether it's Taser or Wolfcom or others that will come, are striking the balance that allows their product to work in the best practices to make sure that that doesn't occur. You'd also have to look at all the other evidence out there. Most of the items or the devices today, I believe that with the built-in technology that's in them, so the storage is there and you dock them, simplifies it. I am very familiar with the back-end technologies since we've implemented them for the last several years. And it is a good thing, but I would say it's more out of convenience, and it allows for less hands-on, because the more hands-on, the more things fail. That's more of a bigger issue than somebody altering it.
Mr. Jones Sawyer.
And I want to thank you both for coming here today. And Chief Carley, it looks like you've done a lot of work on this, and which is really good, especially for this committee, to hear from you and hear about the policies. And Captain Rich Desmond, we've been talking, and I'm really pleased that Commissioner Joe Farrell, is willing to go ahead with the policy. And no disrespect to the Los Angeles Police Department, because I came from the city of LA or Vacaville. I'm hoping that the Highway Patrol of California still has the best policies and procedures worldwide. So I'm just gonna,
a lot of pressure, sir. Thank you.
I'm just going to put that in there, since I am advocating for them to have it. But most important, both the association, Highway Patrol Association, and the management for the Highway Patrol and rank and file are fully working together to integrate and make sure that we come up with something that actually works. So my question is for both of you, of one of you. I know Highway Patrol has had car cameras, and I guess you've had some usage with cameras. This whole discussion about having an officer do the report before they view the camera, have you prosecuted or found, especially when use of force is being done, have you had incidents where you've discovered that their recollection and what they were doing, they kind of concealed? I'm talking about the 1%, I'm not talking about the 99%, so let's not everybody get all crazy here. But at the end of the day, you do have some officers that may want to corrupt the report. And have you, for lack of a better word, busted some and found that the tape was instrumental in ferreting out the truth, which is what we're really trying to get to in real life?
My chief, I'd like to. I was actually thinking about this, sir, when you were talking to one of the prior panelists, and you actually mentioned yourself that usually the camera is not the only evidence out there when you're conducting an investigation. I can't think of a case where there was an in-car camera or any other camera, whether it's someone's cell phone recording or surveillance video or something, where an internal investigation or even a criminal investigation was frustrated by an officer's attempt maybe to characterize something inaccurately. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I am not aware of a case that I've personally been involved. Yes, I think officers have tried to do that, and this is a policy area that we have not developed yet for our pilot. We'll certainly be doing that in consultation and discussions with the California Association of Highway Patrolmen. But I'm not aware of a situation where, even though an officer has attempted to do it, that it's actually frustrated our agency's ability to take appropriate action to prevent and address that misconduct.
Okay.
I'm not aware of any such case, not in Vacaville. I am aware of where video is used for training purposes, or in some cases, and it wasn't body-worn video, it was other video, because this is not the first video to come around, where video actually identified behavior that was disciplinary, or it was an uncertainty in policy, and as an agency that we reacted to that and took appropriate measures. So it does tell a part of the story. It certainly is only a part, and that's why we have investigators in professional standards as well as investigators in investigations.
Thank you.
I want to thank you two gentlemen for coming forward. We truly appreciate you taking your time out to make this hearing much better. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have our last speaker.